Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Kyle Hartung. I'm an Associate Vice President here at Jobs for the Future in our education practice. I am not Julia de Bonaventura. I'll introduce her in a moment. But it's really nice to be here with you today and to welcome you to our Pathways to Prosperity Coalition webinar. I'd like to start with a brief overview about JFF if you're unfamiliar. So JFF is a national nonprofit organization, and for over 40 years, we have been focused on driving transformation of the U.S. education and workforce systems to achieve equitable economic advancement for all. And for over 12 years, our Pathways to Prosperity team has partnered with federal, state, and regional leaders in 32 states and over 150 regions across the country to design, reimagine, and scale innovative education and career pathways systems. And to do that, we partner with stakeholders that span the broad education, training, and workforce ecosystems to design solutions and scale best practices, to advocate and support policies and practices that we know work, to invest in new solutions, and all of this in the service of making a difference in the lived experience of youth, young adults, and for the communities and the economies in which they live. And we're excited to work and learn with you. We know that this work and real change requires all of us to be working together across sectors, and that's a theme you'll hear a lot about today. There are lots of ways to engage with JFF and our Pathways to Prosperity team. Please reach out. We'd love to hear from you and find ways that we can collaborate and partner with you, again, to work and learn together. So this is the first in a series of webinars we're going to do this year as part of our Pathways to Prosperity Coalition, focusing on some deep dive sessions on our Pathways to Prosperity levers. So there are 5 core levers that have guided our work over the past 12 years: secondary to post-secondary integration, career navigation systems, work-based learning, intermediaries, and leadership and policy. Today is one of a number of events we're going to do this year focused specifically on work-based learning. And to do that, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our fabulous colleague, Julia de Bonaventura, who's going to take us through some of the key stories and strategies that are really important as we think about scaling work-based learning. Julia, over to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everybody. I'm Julia de Bonaventura. I'm a director here at JFF. I've been at JFF for a while now, and have been working alongside Kyle and Charlotte and the rest of our education practice team and our P2P partners since I started here at JFF. I'm based right outside of Boston, Massachusetts, where I live with my 2 little girls. They're 4 and 2. I came to JFF from Brigham and Women's Hospital. So for those of you familiar with the Boston area and the Boston area healthcare system, the Brigham is one of the largest healthcare institutions here in the city. And while I was there, I worked in the workforce development division, part of human resources, and was responsible for incumbent training programs for staff at the hospital, coordinating additional education and training opportunities for employee advancement. And I was also responsible for the hospital's work-based learning program for youth. So internships, job shadowing, career exploration activities, supervisor training for initiatives that served both high school and college students. And before I was at the Brigham, I worked at the Boston PIC, which is Boston School to Career or Work-Based Learning Intermediary. These experiences and my own work-based learning experiences brought me to JFF and have really ingrained in me a passion for work-based learning and awareness of the challenges and standing it up and scaling it, and curiosity about how we can be both flexible and innovative in our approach to work-based learning while also holding true the key principles that we think make it such a powerful lever. Now that I am out of the way, we want to know more about you and who's here. So my colleague Courtney is going to share a poll that's just going to ask what stakeholder group you represent. If your group is not on the list, if you fall in that other category, feel free to just share in the chat who you are and where you're coming from. We'll wait a little bit to see responses coming in. All right, we're getting close. We've got a good mix of folks here. Welcome, everybody. We got workforce development, our post-secondary education partners, K-12 education, intermediaries, government. We've got everybody but economic development. But welcome and thank you. And I'm hopeful that regardless of where you are in the system, that there will be things that we chat about today that you'll be able to take back to your partners and to your communities to help stand up and scale work-based learning. There are a lot of different perspectives about the purpose of education and the role that work plays in people's lives and what we as humans are meant to be doing here on this earth. But those big kind of questions aside, I think we can all agree that what we want for young people and students and workers is that they eventually make their way to a good job. And we know that it's taking young people more time today than it has in the past to get to that good job. And this slower journey to good jobs has significant impacts on wealth accumulation because it's taking young people more time to make the kind of money associated with a good job, and they're accumulating more debt along the way. And there are significant disparities in the time it takes to get a good job and then impacts on wealth accumulation by race and ethnicity and gender. The Georgetown Center for Education and Workforce, which I'm a super fan of, along with I know many of my colleagues, published a report a couple of years ago called The Uncertain Pathway from Youth to a Good Job. And in this larger report, they identified 3 of the biggest hurdles that young people face to attaining education and work experiences that would set them on or accelerate their path to a good job. And these are educational affordability, limited career and guidance counseling, and then importantly, and on theme for today, limited access to work-based learning. Now, part of the story here is that in order to get a good job, we know that students and workers need, and young people need, education beyond high school. Your best bet to a good job is a post-secondary degree, an associate's degree, and increasingly a bachelor's degree. So it's good that we're seeing that college enrollment is up. We know that completion is an important area to address for sure, but enrollment is up. At the same time, though, young adult employment is down. And the reality is you need both post-secondary education and work experience to get a good job. So if you need education to get a good job, but you also need work experience, then we think that work-based learning can address what we often feel is like the hands up in the air sentiment from job seekers and students and workers. Employers want me to have work experience in order to employ me, but I can't get work experience unless they employ me. There's uneven access to work experiences or work-based programs across education levels. The more education you have, the higher the likelihood is that you've completed a work experience program. Or said a different way, workers with lower levels of education tend to participate less than those with higher levels of education and work-based learning programs. But again, we know that you need both in order to be on a good path to a good job. Julia Freeland Fisher, who is at the Christensen Institute and somebody who's done a lot of thinking and research about social capital, describes social capital as an invisible but critical asset in the opportunity equation, which I think is a really kind of spot-on way to describe what we often talk about as social capital or professional social capital. We know that young people get a lot of their information about college and careers from their social networks, their peers, their family friends, community members, and through informal advising from adults like coaches or workplace supervisors and colleagues. But relying on a young person's natural exposure to education and careers through their existing social networks of family and friends can have a limiting effect on their access to opportunities, particularly those opportunities that accelerate the path to economic stability. There's some research that we often share that I didn't include here from a 2017 Gallup poll that surveyed students and found that they found the advice that they got from informal work-based sources. So when they were in the workplace, the kind of conversations they were having with colleagues, with peers in the workplace, they found that advice the most helpful in deciding what major to pursue. But they've reported that those access to those sources was the most limited. So it's the most helpful, but they had the least access. And we think that work-based learning can be a solve or can address some of these challenges that we're seeing and the problems that we are seeking to address. Sorry for those of you who are very new to work-based learning that made you wait a few minutes to get to the basics. But here it is. This is how we define work-based learning at JFF. It's when a student or a worker completes meaningful job tasks in a workplace. These job tasks help a student or a worker to develop their readiness for work, to develop the knowledge and the skills that support entry and advancement into careers. And I will likely say this a couple of times today, but work-based learning is meant to be a continuum. It is not a checklist of experiences that once you've done one thing, you move on to the next, never to return again. It's meant to be designed in a way so that it supports lifelong learning and skill development for workers and learners at all different points of a career development journey. A lot of our work through Pathways to Prosperity does start with students who are in high school or on their transition to post-secondary, but work-based learning should be accessible and can be designed for anybody at any stage of career development. This is JFF's work-based learning framework, which separates work-based learning into stages. What you see here on the left, career exploration, we don't consider that work-based learning. We consider career exploration like career fairs or industry projects or industry speakers to classrooms as critical and critically important preparation for work-based learning, but not work-based learning itself, because it typically, for the most part, does not occur in a workplace. But from that foundation of career exploration, the remaining stages, career exposure, career engagement, and career experience are all considered work-based learning, but engagement in them happens for different reasons, and they have different purposes and benefits. It's important here to note that this is JFF's work-based learning framework that we think is well aligned to so many of the strong work-based learning or career development continuum or frameworks that our partners and folks across the country have developed. Towards the end of our time today, we'll share Texas's definition and framework for work-based learning, but states like Colorado and Hawaii have their own version of a work-based learning framework or continuum that provides guidance and sets expectations for their state. And since I joined JFF 7 years ago now, we have seen more and more states really coordinating across state agencies and across leadership at the state level to develop and align on state level definitions of work-based learning, which we find is really useful for then regional and local level implementation of high quality work-based learning. The different stages of work-based learning are designed for different purposes. Students and workers are developing academic and technical and employability skills at all of these different stages. But career exploration, it's about exploration. It's increasing knowledge and awareness of possibilities. Students and workers are beginning to identify their interest areas or areas of strength. Career exposure, then, through activities like job shadowing, helps students and workers to make informed choices about their career and education options. Career engagement is the next stage through activities like internships, for example. And this is where students and workers are beginning to develop employability skills. They are deepening their knowledge in a career field or an occupation. They're learning things that they can connect back to the classroom to strengthen their academic learning. And importantly, internships or other activities in the career engagement stage can be temporary employment and are ideally paid. So back to that question, how do I get employed when they need work experience, but I don't have work experience? Internships are important solve for that. And then the career experience stage, through more intensive experiences or activities like apprenticeships or on-the-job training, is where a student or a worker is developing those specific targeted skills that they need to be successful in a specific industry. They are in these kinds of activities are intentionally and proactively tied to academic learning. They require a lot of coordination between employers and instructors at either the secondary or post-secondary level, often more intentional advising and wraparound supports. And they either are or are very likely to lead to permanent employment. This slide just shares the different types of activities in each of the stages, and won't go through them specifically, but I think is helpful for folks when they start to design the continuum for their own communities or your own partnerships. We're going to pull up a poll here, another one, to get your thoughts about what you see in your own communities as the positive impacts of work-based learning or the benefits. And we think that work-based learning is a really critical piece of the education and career journey puzzle. We know young people need exposure to workplaces, and work-based learning can solve for that. Watching the poll results come in, we'll give them a little bit more time. Okay. A little bit of this is some research for us, but the choose all that apply option, we're seeing a lot of alignment across what we think are the benefits and what you all are seeing or experiencing with, the development of professional or durable skills and exposure to the world of work really coming out as primary impacts, which we would agree with as well. The exposure to the world of work is really helpful for students, again, to begin to build their professional and social capital. Work-based learning can help students and workers understand if their pathway choice, their college major, their internship choice is the right one for them. These are like decision points, right? When in the education and career journey that young people, students and workers are making, and work-based learning can be a really informative experience. Application of classroom learning in the workplace and vice versa really does strengthen academic learning. This is not the most perfect comparison, but I mentioned at the beginning, I have a 4-year-old and she is in preschool, and her preschool is very clear that their philosophy is play is learning and learning is play. 4-year-olds, when they are playing with their friends, they're learning about social interactions, they're building relationships, they're navigating conflict, they're learning about the physical space around them and how they and their peers and adults are interacting with toys, with tools, with nature, with, all the things that are new to when you're newer to life in general. They're just beginning. And so in her school, there's no playtime and then learning time. It's all the same. And I think that we can apply some of that same thinking to work in classroom learning, right? Like we all know, many of us learn better when we're able to apply knowledge in a real world setting. So we like to help folks and work with folks to really make those transitions and reinforce what students are learning in both settings. The professional or durable skills that students or workers are able to build in work-based learning can translate across jobs, across education settings, and again, enhance a person's ability to build their professional social capital. And work-based learning, as you'll see on this next slide, can lead to a temporary or permanent job, which is a very important benefit. I'm going to check in on the chat. I think my colleagues are covering a lot of it. We'll have some time in a bit for open discussion, and we'll check back in on what folks have shared in the chat, but keep it coming. Employers are saying that internships are an important talent development strategy. There's a question, I think, of whether they're investing in work-based learning in younger students and workers, or in work-based learning for those with less education. Some of the research that we've seen has shown that, where employers are investing in talent development, it's actually for those who have a bachelor's degree or higher. Again, we think that coordinated work-based learning starting in high school can address some of those behaviors and patterns that with employers. But it's clear internships are really powerful. They're hard to coordinate, they're hard to scale, but interns convert to employees, and those employees who were interns have higher retention rates after 1 year than those employees that were not sourced through internships. So we've talked about the benefits and the positive impacts that we think are associated with work-based learning for students and workers. But if we want these benefits and purposes to be true, then we think that these principles need to be true too. So design and rigor of work-based learning are critical to ensuring that the work-based learning lives up to its promise. Connections to careers. There is something to be said, of course, for work-based learning that just exposes a young person to the world of work, even if it's not even closely aligned to their career interests or a career track. But as we move further along in the stages of work-based learning, we would hope to see work-based learning aligned to or designed in a way that supports a young person's advancement into a career track. Ideally, work-based learning offers compensation. People should be rewarded for and honored for their contributions, either through financially rewarded, or we're seeing there's a lot of efforts in different states across the country who are figuring out ways to apply work-based learning for credit. But we think that it's important for especially those who are new to the world of work to understand that their contributions are honored and valued, and that can be very clearly communicated through financial support for financial compensation. And also it is an important thing or consideration when we think about the equitable kind of implementation of work-based learning. Offering compensation often can help access for folks. Similarly, rewarding skill development, work-based learning experiences that are designed so that when a young person completes a job task, or they complete a project, or they navigate a tricky situation, that their experiences, that their performance is rewarded, it is identified and it's named, and where it's where maybe they're given feedback. Similarly, providing comprehensive student supports, whether that's wraparound supports through transportation, through support like ensuring that a work-based learning participant has access to the kinds of tools and resources and apparel that they may need for a work-based learning experience. Those are the kinds of things that we're seeing are really make a difference for standing up work-based learning. Similarly, providing meaningful job tasks that build career skills and knowledge. It takes a lot of work. Having designed internships before, it does take a lot of work to design an internship that is set up in a way so that a young person every day is showing up and completing meaningful job tasks that will build skills. But when we think about the positive impacts of work-based learning, that we're only going to see them if experiences are designed so that a young person or student or worker is building intentional skills and knowledge. Apprenticeships are a kind of gold standard here, but do a really good job of identifying targeted skills and how those gains will be validated. Again, there's like really tight connections in apprenticeships between academic instruction and work. And so there's more opportunities for the identification of skills and the identification of how those skills have been developed and validated. And work-based learning can and should support access to an advancement and completion of post-secondary, whether that's through access to credit for work-based learning or more informed decision-making around course taking or college major identification and choices. You saw on our JFF's work-based learning framework, arrows going like every which way, and that is intentional. This is another representation of that continuous kind of intentional cycle that we think about when we think about work-based learning. This is from a researcher, Michaela Leslie Rule, who has done a ton of work, including interviewing thousands of young people of color about how they think about career development and their own career development journeys. And particularly for adolescents and young adults, they are like developmentally wired to explore, to take risks, to try new things, and then to do that all over again. And so work-based learning should not be a singular, it should not be a checklist. It should not be a kind of discrete set of steps that once you're done, you don't ever go back to the beginning. It is meant to be a learning journey and one that can be repeated over and over again as somebody moves through their life. So what are some ways that we can embed work-based learning into pathways? These are the kind of steps that we help our partners take to design and implement high-quality work-based learning. Again, integrating work-based learning and classroom learning, whether that is, we're doing some work in Colorado right now with where we're trying to implement an advisory course that involves college and career navigation supports and trying to think with schools about how they can provide students with reflection time in the school day where they can make sense of whether it's their own work experiences outside of school that are not connected to their pathways or in school work-based or work-based learning that they're doing connected to their pathways work. But we often find that if students are given that opportunity and that space to make sense of outside of the workplace, to make sense of what they experienced, then that meaning making is really powerful. There are states across the country who have started to develop and identify those academic, technical, and employability skills, often by industry sector, that can be taught and measured over time, that through coordination between employers and education partners, and agreements between employers and education partners on what those skills are, that greater alignment is really, really powerful for students too, to say, okay, what I'm learning in school, I actually know has been validated by the employers in my community. And when I go to them for an internship, we're using the same language to talk about the things that I've learned and how it can be applied. We do often work with folks to develop their own work-based learning continuum that is, can fall under the umbrella of the perspectives that JFF takes about what the different stages could look like, but really speaks to and meets the needs of a specific community and what kinds of opportunities they may have available to them with their employer partners. Work-based learning, as it is defined, happens in a workplace. So of course you need industry partners and business partners that ideally are co-designing work-based learning. And we see some of our partners who are developing sector-specific partnerships and sector-specific work-based learning continuum, actually, that has been validated and co-designed by their local employers. I think I've touched on this already today a bit, but there is value in any, well, in a well-designed internship, even if it's not aligned, especially in the early years for a young person, even if it's not aligned to a student's industry focus or their pathway program of study. But as students get further into their academic journey and they're making decisions about dual credit, they're making decisions about what pathway and course choices to pursue in high school, or they're making choices about what post-secondary program to pursue, what college major to pursue. Work-based learning that is designed and aligned to options in their regional labor market is kind of a gold standard here too. We'll talk about work-based learning data, but it's hard to get at, access to work-based learning and actually the quality of a work-based learning experience and to understand it. But where we've seen some really promising starts here are for states or regions or local partnerships who've developed work-based learning quality indicators. So they've worked with their cross-sector partners to develop a framework, to develop a continuum, and then they've really thought about what does it look like for this experience to be of quality? How can we all get on the same page about what it would mean to design something like an internship, like a career fair, like, a job shadow day that is of quality, and how can we come to some agreements about that? Once you've defined quality, you can start to assess implementation of these experiences. But we know that getting work-based learning data isn't easy. There are some, like I've said, institutional or state level policies that require or encourage work-based learning participation, or for graduation, for example, or have design policies where work-based learning can be for credit. And in that way, often then we can see it built into student information systems. But in a lot of places, work-based learning data is on a spreadsheet, or, I was having a call with one of a site that I coached last week, and we were talking, they're just at the beginning of building out work-based learning, and they have a lot of like really great starts. And we were talking about work-based learning data and how they can understand where they're starting from and their baseline. And I was asking what they use to track it, and this partner was like, it is in my head. That's where it lives. It lives in my brain. And we know that that's a reality for so many. And this person's job isn't even to coordinate work-based learning, right? It's something that they have taken on as an addition because they know it's really important. But in this school, they just don't have the infrastructure in place to measure it, to track it, and to build upon it. But it is important, right? So it's really important to understand who is accessing work-based learning, who's benefiting from work-based learning, what those benefits might be, how you can improve on work-based learning in your community once you understand who's accessing it and what's happening. And then case making for more investments, right? Like, we think that that work-based learning is super powerful, but it is really hard to scale, and the resources for it can be limiting. So more data, more data that shares the positive impacts of it is helpful for case making. I mentioned at the beginning that I worked at the Boston PIC earlier in my career, and that's Boston's work-based learning intermediary. And Neil Sullivan, who is, I think, now the retiring executive director of the PIC, after a tremendous career, the PIC and other intermediaries across the country, we believe play really critical roles in implementing and scaling work-based learning. We're going to pull up another poll right now that will just gauge your perspectives on the greatest barriers to scaling work-based learning that you're seeing. We don't think that work-based learning intermediaries are like the silver bullet in addressing these challenges, but they can really be an important support. And while these results are coming in, I'll just mention, and Kyle may mention this at the end, that we have a follow-up webinar. We're doing these deep dives on the P2P levers. One of our levers is intermediaries. In February, there's another deep dive on intermediaries, where I'm sure that we'll be talking about how intermediaries can support the implementation and scale of work-based learning. All right, I'm going to give it another couple of seconds. Okay, what's rising to the top are limited industry partnerships, a lack of resources to coordinate work-based learning, limited funds to pay students. There are a lot more reasons I know that are not on this list, and we can certainly talk about those. We'll have time for Q&A. But yes, all these things are challenges, student schedules and transportation, and it's often challenging to know where to start. So like I said, we don't think intermediaries can solve all of our problems, but they can be super helpful, and they can convene convene sector partnerships to understand what employers in your community how they're able to engage in work-based learning, what they might get out of work-based learning, what their motivations are. They can facilitate collaborations among all partners as you're getting your work-based learning up off the ground. A lot of the statewide or regional level work-based learning frameworks or continuums that we see are led by intermediaries. And so they can be a neutral voice really in getting folks from different sectors or different parts of the system to come together and align on design and definitions. And then they can be brokers and connectors. In Boston, for example, the PIC is the connector between the Boston Public Schools and students in the Boston Public Schools and all of the private sector employers in the city, as well as the community-based organizations that employ so many of the young people in the city, and can serve as that kind of central place for and a resource really, with the resources in schools, in employers or in other institutions don't have access to resources to collect data and to manage data and to analyze and understand what to do with it. A lot of work-based learning intermediaries or pathways intermediaries have a function where a data management or a data analysis function that can be a huge support. I've mentioned some of these, but some of the state strategies that we see that can support quality and scale are these state frameworks for high quality work-based learning. A number of states, Texas being one of them, Colorado being another, Washington State being another, support and fund regional intermediaries that are playing a critical role in scaling work-based learning in regions. And through grant programming, they're able to support from the state level. States are embedding paid work-based learning opportunities into required CTE programs of study. So not just for credit, but students are being paid for that as well. And then there's some state-specific laws around eligibility for work and labor laws for students and certain liability concerns, and state level actors can be helpful in cutting through the noise about like what should we actually be worried or concerned about, and what might be a myth that we can address, or what might be a policy that actually can be shifted with enough support. Sorry that this is a little blurry, but I didn't want to get too far. Didn't want to leave here today without mentioning that this week is National Apprenticeship Week. And JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning is hosting a webinar actually later today that will be celebrating the kind of history and story of apprenticeships over the last 10 years and how far we've come. And we'll talk just briefly about apprenticeships because one, it's National Apprenticeship Week, and it's really a super powerful work-based learning model that we think that has been enjoying a lot of support at the federal level. And there are JFF and a lot of our partners have done some really amazing standing up resources and guidance for folks who can actually to build out work-based or apprenticeship programs, I'm sorry, in their communities. Apprenticeship is a job from the first day, combines on-the-job training, mentorship, and related classroom instruction, right? So all of those core principles that I mentioned are baked into the design of apprenticeship. Similar to internships, there's some really positive and compelling data around the impact of apprenticeships, both for employers and for apprentices, in terms of employers being able to find and recruit talent that they keep, and apprentices being able to pretty quickly get access to a good job with powerful wages. Oh, sorry for here we go. I think the most important point here is that, all of these critical components are baked into apprenticeships, and registered apprenticeships in particular have these requirements. And in the past few years, apprenticeships have expanded beyond, their traditional industry areas to now include healthcare, information technology, manufacturing, financial services, and education. A lot of our partners in the state of Texas are trying to build out education apprenticeships, given the state's teacher shortages and challenges around educator training and educator education. Okay, in our last few minutes, I want to make sure we have some time for questions. We'll share some of the promising practices and examples that we have seen in our partners across the network and across the country. In Texas, like I mentioned, they have a state level framework for work-based learning. The Texas Tri-Agency Workforce Initiative is a collaboration between the 3 state agencies: the state agency that oversees K-12, the Texas Education Agency, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, which oversees higher education in the state, and then the Texas Workforce Commission, which oversees the workforce systems. And they've developed, it took a little bit of time, but they aligned on a definition for work-based learning, quality standards, and have done a lot of work in coming together to make sure that the agencies at the state level are aligned on what they mean when they say work-based learning. And that's beginning to have trickle-down effects across the entire state into regional intermediaries, for example, and then each agency's kind of constituents are socializing and implementing work-based learning now aligned to this framework. So we've seen that being super powerful, and there's some continued work that they're planning to build upon it, like a framework that builds out, exactly what quality looks like for each of the models. In Washington State, there has been some amazing work with Career Connect Washington. Their state level leadership for standing up what they call career launch and apprenticeships in the state. And they have a really coordinated system of infrastructure across the state. So they have these regional networks that are doing more regionally focused work-based learning. They organize by sector. They have practitioners and program builders at the institutional level, and then at the state level, they have cross-agency collaboration. So they're really they prioritize work-based learning as a state and are really hitting it at every level of systems. And importantly, they have grant funding that's available to regional partnerships who are interested in expanding work-based learning. In New York City, Career Ready New York City is an initiative out of the Mayor's Office, the Center for Youth Employment, and they are a citywide resource for work-based learning supports. They have some cool resources, and again, this is an example of the investments and the signaling to the city. Because these resources exist and because this Office of Youth Employment exists, it's been, I think, an important catalyst for the city and the partners in the city to focus on work-based learning and really invest in it. They have this work-based or this employer engagement menu, which is helpful for when they are building, when folks are building partnerships with employers and industry partners to really understand what it looks like practically to engage in some of these activities. So from a tour all the way to a youth apprenticeship, what does that mean for me as an industry partner in terms of the number of hours and the kinds of responsibilities that I have? So this is available on the Career Ready New York City website. They also have a toolkit that is a resource for employers who are interested in engaging in work-based learning. Through one of our, JFF is partnering with the Tennessee Department of Education through a grant from the federal U.S. Department of Ed's Education, Innovation, and Research Program, which is a, we are interested in innovative ways of scaling dual enrollment. And one of the way that they're doing it in Tennessee is in integrating dual enrollment and work-based learning into what they call work-based courses. And so work-based courses integrate the classroom and the workplace by combining work and learning for students. In Tennessee, the focus is on STEM and those dual enrollment courses, and students who are engaged in work-based courses fulfills requirements for both high school and college credit. It's requiring, of course, strong collaboration between K-12 partners, employers, and post-secondary partners, given the fact that it's this combination of work-based learning and dual credit. 80%, practically 80% of the class is taught in the classroom, and 20% is taught through an employer at a work site. And this, the priority focus is on recruiting and supporting 11th and 12th grade students, Black and Latinx students, women and low-income students in Tennessee in the schools that are a part of this grant program.